Beautiful. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for Module 7's Fireside, The Gift. This is our last Fireside of Kernel Block 7, and we are very grateful to be sharing it with each of you. The block started with all sorts of introductions. And I always say that the Kernel Intros channel is a place that really feels magical to me because there are so many people who are joining from so many different contexts and sometimes share things that you could really not find on this person anywhere else on the internet. And it really creates this living sense that these people are here, they're with us, and that in a way the container is hopefully an invitation to conversation. When we looked up the word artifact, which is a word that we're still kind of playing with here, the original definition you see is an item of cultural or historical interest. And the reason why I struggle with it, I actually will skip ahead to one of the last artifact slides, but there's many. The original wording seems to speak a lot about debating meaning and controlling memories, but I think in the kernel context, I think it has a potential, artifacts have the potential to guide our memories. They bring us stories that we can choose how we want to integrate back into our present moments and ultimately into our lives. And for each of you, it really means a lot that you spent time with us in a variety of different contexts, whether in person, online, or in mixed contexts. There are a lot of slides that I could make, and some of these show different things that happened. This was a dinner last week in Portugal, I believe a lunch perhaps with Vanessa and Jason and Yara in Baltimore. This in Korea is some really incredible work happening with bucket hats and shirts from Sophie, Sujin, and others, the kind of kernel folks on Halloween. You have meetings that have happened in a lot of different contexts all over the world, and so many things that like really are beautiful things to pull forward from Slack. This message from Sylvia stood out, but there are so many messages. This one says, "What if we are imperfect so that we may never be alone?" I really love that. The kernel vibe hours has clearly been something that lots of people have really enjoyed, and I love this reference from Tatiana. What if your adventure is not trying so hard to have an adventure and just enjoying these moments of synchronicity and connection? This is really a big part of the story. I think this was a dinner in Berlin, and there are many more that we hope that we can populate a bit together. So this Figma file, which I'll put in the chat, is intended to be a shared resource. Let me see if I can like zoom out and find my way over here. Basically what you're looking for is this section that says KB7 artifacts. It's pre-populated with a few things, but if you're willing to hop in here and post anything that stood out to you, whether it's a Slack message, a post that you're reminded of, something that you yourself have shared elsewhere that you think might look good on this collage, we welcome your additions. And it doesn't have to be now, but we will return to this as not only the call goes on, but as we head into celebration, which is the last event that we'll do next Tuesday. So we're close to the end of the syllabus, and there's one more expo day, and then there's celebration next Tuesday. Those are the last two events of Block 7. But the structure of the syllabus, we hope, points you towards these spirals. The way that it reads is so that as you get to the end, there are many links that can take you back to different beginning points for you to explore, not only within the contents of the kernel.community site, but of course to all of these different places on the internet that we sense are really gifts. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to Andy to take us through his interpretation to begin of Module 7, The Gift.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's well put. The design intention behind the syllabus, which we have been describing as a spiral for the last few blocks, because that fits well with the feel of it in human time, what might otherwise be called kairos. The design intention was really as a blockchain itself. So each module links increasingly more to the modules which have come before it. You get these strong links pointing backwards, supported by the work that we have done in previous weeks in order to build towards increasingly shared understandings, which don't ever reach some teleological endpoint. There's no ultimate argument. There's no singular answer. There's no end. And while each block has to be its own independent container, that independence is always balanced naturally with interdependence. Everything has its own absolute and independent value. You are who you are, uniquely, irrevocably, and with your own total unicity. And that is only possible in relationship. The topics this week are at the edge of what we might think of as healthy speculation. This aspect of speculation, which is so often demonized in many different fields, is actually at the core of artistic practice, just as it is at the core of finance. When we take risk, we naturally create value. There's something really interesting about that particular insight. In the artistic realm, particularly in flow arts or circus arts, the risky act is immediately valuable. And it's seen as such that it's completely indistinguishable. When the trapeze swinger lets go and flies through the air to meet the partner on the other side, it is inherently and unambiguously and inseparably valued in that moment, because you see the risk that is being taken. And that is what gives the performance its rapture, its particular kind of uniqueness. And when we can see such speculation in the context, which really allows for this kind of reciprocity, the taking of risk in ways in which we know we will be held and supported by the people that perform with us, then we can begin to understand a little bit more about these two words that the whole module revolves around: spirit and ideology. Spirit and ideology. Big words, really, really big words, and really difficult to understand because of the inertia of language, and because it is, in my opinion, in fact, impossible to understand these without asking for help, without being in relationship with one another, without learning to see that, in fact, asking for help is at once offering somebody else the opportunity to give the greatest gift that there is. To recognize that, in fact, receiving gratefully, to receive a gift in good faith, is to make that gift a gift. It is not the giving that creates gifts. It is the reception in true faith. And that particular aspect links to so many different things. It links to humility. It links to the shared soil out of which we all grow, which brings us each and every one our own nutrition from the same basic living process. And when we finally begin to understand that and can hold these opposites, not just in mind, but in heart and in gut, as that which not only illuminates one another and complements one another, but contains fully, right? Then you get to what is quoted in the beginning in the index page of the syllabus. Daisetsu Suzuki talks about the actual function of opposites. What is the function of opposites? Because we've been playing with them for 8 weeks. And if you scroll down a little bit further, it's not this rain that falls on the just and the unjust. That is part of what it means, not just to complement, but contain fully the other. It's here. It's the actual function of a pair of opposites. It expresses how we apply them to our everyday practice. Every day, every moment, every instant is made up of this oscillation. And when we are aware of it, and when it is usual, ordinary, every day, then we're walking, right? Then we're walking and we get to walk together, and there's no greater thing than that. It's not complicated. It's not abstract. It's not some high-minded thing. It's just to be able to receive gratefully the gift of this life and live it fully in relationship with other people. That's it. That's the whole thing. The whole course builds up to that. It's so deceptively and beautifully and wonderfully and frustratingly simple. And we have to go through each our own journey, our own modes of practice, our own delusion, our own enlightenment, our own bliss, our own suffering, until we come to realize it was always right here and it was always with one another. And when that is fully the case, then you get to this deeper meaning of the words spirit and religion, which is not just religare, not just that which binds us, not the link between faith and finance and the fictions that we continuously tell each other, which have great power and specificity when applied consciously and with intention, but regio, which is attention, observation of the numinous, that you will be held to account by your own soul for the careful observations you made in this life. You'll be held to account by your own soul for the careful observations you made in this life. It's not a dogma, it's not a dictum, it's what is. It's things as it is what Daisetsu Suzuki calls it. And knowing that there is then finally this movement into a recognition of the inertia of language. Joan asked at the beginning of this block, what is Web3? Is it an idea? Is it a dream? Is it an ideology? Is it a set of tools? It's a word. It's a word. That's all. And that's all. It's both of those things at the same time. Recognizing that you know that there is the spirit of the gift, which is constantly alive in each moment. And it's not about utility. It's not about what you can do with it. It's about recognizing in each moment there is such a thing as the gift. To be aware of it is already more than enough. And when you put it in natural language like that, it sounds quite easy, right? To be aware, just be aware that every moment is a gift. But reflect on that for a moment and recognize that to know every single moment as a gift, no matter how difficult or beautiful it is, to really know and remember in the moments that each moment is a gift is an enormous and mighty ask. It's extraordinary. It's the impossible realized, to really know that. Not as a set of propositional words, but as participatory experience, as perspectival knowing, as perceptual engagements. And from there, then it becomes possible to talk about Marianne Brunn and Mary Oliver and this notion that there is no paradigm. There's no paradigm to hold this because we are the paradigm. It was there in that video from NPR. We are the beloved community every time we want to be. And it's not about paradigmatic knowing. It's not about a particular framework. It's not about a particular set of tools. It's not about a particular way in which you wrap the gift. It's not even about a particular kind of humility and how you might receive it. There's something yet more essential which can never be reduced to words. Although words, honestly put in true voice with real and right relationship, wrap the invisible in this veil that allows us to, for a moment, perceive its shape. And if we have the ongoing awareness, Marlon calls it compassionate awareness, which is not about getting caught by either one's metabolism, the fact of life as it manifests in your particular body, your particular time, space, and context, and not about one particular metaphor, not about a particular cultural condition or particular sequence of words, but somewhere between that, you can recognize that there is the underlying imagery of human doubt and desire, which is what Marianne Brunn calls it. It's not that we need to develop a new language. It's that language must always be held to that account, right? That someday someone might be able to say in words then eloquent and succinct what all of us so desperately yearn for now. This paradigmless world, which is not about one perspective or even one community or even like plurality as a concept. It's about none of those things. There's something else which we can very occasionally taste more than talk about. It's what Paul Myberg is pointing at in the very beginning of Kernel when he says that to know a thing fully, to go all the way to its opposites, is to recognize that there is no thirst. You either have water or you do not. And in between is nothing. It's just the radiant fact of water, right? The taste of life as it flows through every single moment. The Buddhists talk about the noble truth, right? There is suffering. Suffering is caused by thirst. There is freedom from suffering. And then because the intention of all of this is to try and ground very old thoughts which totally lack originality. There is nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new in this presentation. There is nothing new in Kernel. But what we try to do is ground it in our particular context, our particular work, our particular time and space, which has to do with this personal and technical inquiry, this weaving together of our own thinking skills as it applies to distributed networks and the technical requirements of doing that in a wholesome way that genuinely cultivates wisdom. And in order to do that, we end by looking at what it really means to not just have planetarity, right? This last and most beautiful complementary opposite of the emergence and the preciousness of sapience, wisdom, that is simultaneously aware of the precarity and the violence of the conditions from which it has come. Not just that planetarity, but also a perfect language. And the perfect language must be seen in the context of what I've just said. No endpoint, no ultimate, no singular answer, no teleology. The perfect language is a process. It's a willingness. It's a readiness. It's a ness, right? It goes on and on and on. It endlessly expands. And that's finally where we get to in the final paragraph, which I've never really been able to point to, but I will do so now. And that's, to say that all of this is just about this simple notion of being good. That's what it comes down to, And most fascinatingly for us here is that the language of the good is also a language of self-imposed limits. Knowing this, right? Knowing there's a Nancy Schneidner poem, which you can search for in Kernel, that talks about knowing limits, to know that limits no longer exist. But that when we enter language, when we enter relationship, when it's about how we live well with one another, then the language of the good is a language of self-imposed limits, which comes from an experience of the boundless and the timeless, but recognizes its particular application in this time, in this space. And the whole point here is that we seek perfect expression only as a means. Perfect expression is not an end. It is a means toward realizing a convivial life lived together in what has been called the golden mean, the middle way. There's so many different words for this in each and every tradition. But that golden mean, or the middle path, or the root verses, or whatever you want to call it, the Tao that flows to the lower points or the high, it's akin to the program of least complexity, right? Which is what this post is really talking about, the program of least complexity, because it requires no additional symbol to know when to stop, right? That's how in algorithmic information theory we define succinct programs. It requires no additional bit, no additional symbol to stop. It knows when to stop by virtue of this rhythmic harmony, balance of the whole. That's the holy grail of this kind of work, is not just the development of universal languages in particular contexts that can be used to help us explore shared truths together, but concise programs that know when to stop. And they know how to stop only by virtue of this rhythmic harmony, the balance of the whole. That's a profound and really beautiful way to live a life, to have this as the inquiry, which drives us on as we try to figure out how to realize the gift of this life that we've been given and give it back to the others that we have the gift of sharing it with, until we realize every single moment is just that gift, on and on. And it's all in the golden mean. There's no possibility of deviating. But that's not a authoritarian or limiting notion. It's total freedom. Thank you very much for being with us and for going through this whole course. It's such a privilege to get to do this. So I'm enormously and endlessly grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. The first time I met Andy was in 2018, when there's a talk that he was giving with some really interesting pants on that day, on the perfect language. He was working at Status at the time. We're doing a lot of work on light clients, the idea that each phone should be able to run a light node, and that would allow for little or a lot more decentralization. But the idea of language has been with Andy for a long time, and I appreciate this reading of module 7 and the way that Andy has gone into it. It is very much how each module really does read, if you so please. So often in these firesides, we just cover the two kind of main crafted readings. In Andy's reading today, it's kind of the first fireside and probably the first one of module 7 where he went through all 5. And you can find some Easter eggs here. the gift of no paradigm is perfection. And I think that like the way that Andy's been speaking about perfection is interesting, because it's not an endpoint, as that word typically induces in your feeling. So what I want to do is to offer that this week, as every week, each of you is our fireside guests, and it really does mean a lot that you've been here, and for you to be here in week 7 means that you've probably stuck it out through some confusing moments, some moments of challenge and growth in different directions. And so, as always, really in Fireside, but perhaps even more so, we welcome your voices as we continue to explore this module for the next bit. And we consider you kind of the greatest guest that we could have. I'll bring just a few things to the forefront that were on the pages. This like idea of scalability, to split those words up. It's an imagining and constructing of frameworks where individuals and communities can develop. And imagining and constructing of frameworks where individuals and communities can develop, the idea being that like learning communities within our context of Web3 and DAOs and new types of organization, this is the means by which scaling ability can happen. But importantly, there will be no one model that should be scaled universally. This, I think, goes back to perfection. In giving, there's, I think, an exploration that you can hear in how Andy describes it as well, that yes, transactions are important on blockchains, and the idea of exchange economies gives us the ability to do so much more as a human species. But the overall bend of this last module is exploring this idea of gift economies, how they fit with one another, and how new things may fit within a paradigm that appreciates both, and perhaps beyond those paradigms. So yes, there are many things that I'm sure we can tug upon. I'm happy to, ask a question or two to Andy, but I would prefer if anyone has anything that's on their mind that they would like to share or bring into conversation, we could start there and see where we end up. Ola, please go ahead.
Thanks. Gratitude to you, Vivek and Andy, for this adventure so far. And I think maybe because I'm still struggling to understand the language, and that is pretty much the beauty of kernel itself, but I'm trying to understand how perfecting language fits into what we are exploring writ large, regardless of our technical know-hows or everyday thing we are most drawn to. So yeah, how does that fit? What are like the most artful, simple language to help me or anyone else understand how to fit this into what is being explored?
Thank you so much, Ola. That's a lovely question. The Search for the Perfect Language is a book by Umberto Eco, an incredible Italian writer. And in it, you'll find that like looking for the perfect language is it's been going on for a very long time. It's not a new idea. And it was really given great popularity by a man called Gottfried Leibniz, who was a German theologian who also happened to be an incredible mathematician. He came up with a lot of really interesting concepts, including monads, but as a theologian and a mathematician, he was really fascinated with the notion of computation way before computers were built, precisely because he was really interested in how you could come down to a universal calculus, right? That was his life's work. And he developed calculus at the same time that Newton did. We use Newton's method, but we use Leibniz's notation, because Leibniz was obsessed with how you could take the greatest amount of complexity and put it into the simplest possible set of symbols that could then be used and executed, could be used to calculate stuff with in a reproducible and true way, right? That was his whole thing. And given his theological bent, he came to say that the perfect language would most likely be binary, 0 and 1, because that is the deepest expression of God. The fascinating, there's many other chapters in this search, right? But for so many people, it has been about this natural human desire for certainty, safety, clarity, predictability, reliability in the world, right? That if I can say exactly what I mean, and you can hear exactly what was meant, and I can be sure that you have understood exactly what I meant, then we have a perfect language, and it will remove the possibility of misinterpretation, right? And you can hear from the way that I'm framing that seems kind of funny to me, because it misses so much which is essential about interpretation as a psychosocial phenomenon and ambiguity, which is critical to our ability to go on relating with one another. And the reason that I touch on all of this is because you'll remember all the way back in module 0, there's this piece on trust, right? And in trust, we talked about the really interesting way in which that English word trust has come from the Latin veritas, verifiability, which is so amplified in crypto and Web3. Don't trust, verify, right? It's all about this aspect of veritas. But there is another root to trust, which is triova, right? It means that which is reliable, stable, solid. And that has nothing to do with verifiability, right? What is reliable in this world? Where can you put your identity? Where can you put your sense of self? On what can you truly rely? A very deep question. And when we have both of those roots in mind, then we can begin to think about, okay, why is it interesting to develop universal languages? Because it allows us to share certain kinds of trust, right? And establish common knowledge or truths, little t, together. Right? And that is in and of itself inherently valuable. So we moved into value and narrative in week 1, and we said that the ability to tell fiction has always been intimately linked to the kind of value that we can generate in the world. And what matters is not just the kind of fiction that you can tell, but the functions your language can execute, because we have executable language these days, universal Turing complete languages that allow us not just to tell fictions, but enact them in the world without the threat of violence. And that's, again, an inherently valuable thing to do. The thing that must be defended against, the shadow side, is this drive toward the perfect capital P end of the process, right? Because it's there's not one most succinct program. There is a set of them, each of which is balanced in its own unique way, and each of which has its own rhythm. You don't just get, there are many ways of stopping a program without having an extra empty bit or way of suggesting that this is the end of whatever process is running. So if we can have an appreciation that it is possible to develop increasingly perfect means of expressing ourselves in particular contexts, not only will we understand ourselves better, which is the root of all of this work. But we will also be able to perceive and transfer value contextually. Right? We'll be able to perceive the context and therefore transfer value more immediately, is another way of saying it. Like the search for the perfect language is really like a deeply personal inquiry. Right? What do I want? Because that's the biggest problem when you read Leibniz or Ramsey or any of these people who are involved in the search for the perfect language. It's like that first assumption, I can say exactly what I mean. Have you ever tried that? It's hilarious, right? I mean, how can you say exactly what you mean? What do you mean? It's very funny, you know? So appreciating the humor of that, like the search for the perfect language is first this personal inquiry. Who are you? What do you really mean? What do you really want? Wonderfully powerful tool to have increasingly precise languages for expressing that. Because I have certain economic ideas which I find very, very difficult to wrap in natural language, but I can code them. And that's an enormously powerful thing. Right? I have a whole idea for a currency in kernel blocks, which flips what it means to have assets and liabilities, what balance means. And that's enormously difficult to describe in natural language because people are like, what are you talking about? But I can describe it in code in about 100 lines. Right? And it's there. That's a very, very powerful thing to be able to do because it speaks deeply to an ability to express what I really want, what I really mean. But the whole thing here is that like it needs to be in terms of the fictions that you can tell and the functions you can get your language to execute, which is always dependent upon others and always dependent upon their interpretation, which in and of itself is an irreducible and complex process. So like this is why no such thing as the perfect language, one perfect language, or end of the process, but this ongoing exploration that allows us to play increasingly principled games and to find more and more value based on both an ability to like verify what we really mean and want, and then make reliable and solid the context in which those desires are enacted in relationship with others.
I feel there's two questions in the chat from Dunia and Michaela that I think alongside Ola, your beautiful question, have continued the conversation. I wonder if either of you would be interested in expanding on your questions. No worries. If not, there's a lot in there.
I'm curious if Michaela, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, Michaela.
Michaela.
Yeah. Were you passing it over to me, or
Yes.
were you curious?
Because actually, I have a question, but it's like I was curious about the very beginning, around speculation, and bringing like that in terms of like this art and the finance, and I was curious to go back there. So perhaps if you want to stay here, then you should ask your question.
Yeah, sure. But then we should also go where you want to go. Actually, this kind of came out when we were on the Lisbon dinner with the Kernel Fellows. And I was talking to, I can't remember well his name, but he's working on AI. And I was telling him that my personal adventure is around love. And he told me something super interesting that now I'm going to bring up. Maybe it's also going to move something around. He told me if I was able to define love. And I said, well, that can be many things, but I think it's a common language that we all beings can speak or can communicate or express. And then he brought complementary opposites so well. He said, well, if we want to understand love, then what's not love? What is the opposite of love? And I want to bring that also to the conversation, because I think that for all of us to understand what the language of love is, or if love is a true language, or what is not love and what is not the language of love. And this, why I remember this so much is because I think that's the common language that we all have. And for me, it is the perfect language. So I would love to hear what others think about it.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. I wonder, Vivek, if you have thoughts about this first.
Yes, I think it's such a beautiful question, Michaela. And I think in the chat, you've gotten so many different things, when that question was asked. Ileana put a sentence that I don't even know if she intended to end there or not, but it said, math isn't exactly a universal language, love is more. And it ended there. And I thought that was perfect. Not sure if it was intentional or not, but love is more. This idea that balance can only come from a place where there is more, that it has to be felt, that it has to be alive, that it has to be moved with. There's another part of this block that's been really beautiful, is the movement guild for me, because Antonio and Marlon and Jean Bloch and all of the different practitioners that Antonio's brought into this physical digital setting where you can turn your Zoom camera off, but you can still be moving with other people. You start to feel things that are definitely not being spoken in words. And that's just one example of how that's quite obvious. There are things that people can move that they cannot say. Andy brought up being able to code something, but not be able to say it in spoken word. I feel like the body is such a beautiful place for that I've been exploring and trying to pay attention to in this exploration of love. And yeah, I think there's something very practical about it too, in the context of maybe the roots of Titans from which kernel flows. The thing that I always brought up was weddings. It's they're not the perfect representation of love, but they are close. And it was always the North Star that Britt would bring up. He would bring up the people that got married, that met in Titans, or the weddings that he went to, as kind of the things that he was most excited about, the families and the stories and celebrations that they shared, and the reminder that that type of thing could not be measured. And I think that that's where love is more from Eliana really comes to mind, because more can also not be measured. It's just more. And you kind of just leave it at that. So maybe those are my reflections. Now that I've called on Eliana a few times, maybe you might have something to add, but yeah, that's where I would start.
No, Vivek, you said everything so beautifully. I don't know if I could add more to that. I feel like you really understand my way of thinking. Yeah, I think, something that you did say that was really beautiful is, every language is only, an attempt to describe, even math in all of its theory is only an attempt to describe the wide array of human experience. And if you imagine that we all have slightly different experiences on this earth, the only language that can fundamentally cover each expression for each individual as like the language of embodiment and, the language of intuition and the language of love that, like we kind of have inside ourselves. So I find it really interesting, especially as, growing up as somebody who spoke a couple languages and, kind of like listening to other people speak their languages and, hearing the different ways we have to describe the same phenomena. We're all, approaching math, religion, and love with our own subjective experiences, which I think inherently makes it unobjective.
Yeah. Thank you. I see Maya, Simone, James. I think you could really move with the conversation if any of you has something to add. Please feel free.
Maybe just a small reflection. In my experience or recent experience is the inability to see someone else, see through someone else. So that would be the opposite of love. So just being awake and present, which may be synonymous with love, but it's odd, right, that we have this expression, love is blind, but then again, being blind to someone else it could be also the opposite of it.
Miawi, please go ahead.
GM, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
So I think like when we are talking about love, it's not tied to one meaning. I mean, for everyone, it refers to something different. It can be changed in their own experience and according to their own life. And I just think that probably what is not love, just probably the not having that sense of being loved could be the opposite of it, probably the emptiness. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Miawi. I'm reminded of what Ryan brought up in Learn Track with John yesterday, the word neglect as an opposite to be mindful of. Yeah, that's beautiful, Miawi. Thank you. Would James or Maya or anyone else?
Yeah, I could say something. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been playing around with this idea a little bit. It's been really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. And I think there's lots of different definitions of how you could, you could define a perfect language or something close to a perfect language is something that everyone understands. And I think the really interesting thing about the scientific revolution, a few hundred years ago, is that people began to verify things, and that verification became a way of communication throughout the world as ideas began to be able to be verified using the scientific method. And I think that's a really interesting way when you think about how we all speak different spoken languages, yet there are many, not so much truths as common understandings of the world built on hundreds of years of detailed study and research. That is why we can exchange. We could have a discussion about physics with someone on the other side of the world who comes from a different culture, and I think that's what I was getting at when I posted in the chat about how a perfect language or something close to a perfect language would be anything based on something that still exists even when you stop believing in it or its concepts. So you may not believe that if you decide to not believe that the sun exists anymore, it's still there. And it's verifiable that it's still there. And I guess that's where my mind goes with it. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, James. I just want to point out, like, this exploration of language with this level of technical exploration and room for things that are beyond it. I think it's the heart of why Kernel for me has been so generative. It's both and I hope, Ola, this has been a long exploration of the question of like, how does language fit in? Because it took me a very long time to even understand why Andy was even bringing language into a Ethereum conference in 2018. But yeah, it's something I'm still learning more about with this conversation. Brennan, I'd love to hear from you.
But which kind of love, Vivek? That's the question.
Philo's really had me going in the chat.
So I love bringing there's that word again. I very much enjoy like drawing the kind of interesting line where in English we have the word love, but in ancient Greek, for example, there were many words, 3 in particular, and so we don't realize the way in which love has these different facets or had for different cultures. And I think those facets are still very useful today. And like words that we've inherited from Greek that contain love without realizing it. I mean, many people know Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love because it's Philos Delphia, and philosophy is not like, chasing words around in circles, trying to find the perfect language, but it is loving the process of becoming wiser, the loving pursuit of wisdom. So kind of the 3 general ancient Greek words that are most commonly used in relation to love are eros, philos, and agape. And my understanding of them is eros is like the consumptive love, wanting to consume and be consumed by the object of your love, to become a part of it and for it to become a part of you. Philos is the longing, loving pursuit of whatever the object is, knowing that you cannot be it and it cannot be you, but that like 2 eagles, you circle around each other, spiraling deeper and deeper. And agape, which is the love that gives life. To literally forgive, like to give forward without reason, to pour your life force into another for the sake of the other. And agape is like central to Christianity, as are the other 2. But I think that the exploration of those distinctions really helps bring love into a particular kind of focus that can bear fruit, especially since it's a different way of viewing it than we do on an everyday basis. But we can see each of those aspects in our culture because so much of our, not so much the words we use when we talk, but the way we talk, it's not ours, out of the blue. It's been developed over centuries and millennia. And so the ideas are still there, even if the words are less so.
Beautiful.
There was something I think that just was put in the chat around +1 on indifference being the opposite of love. And I think, James, it was you who said like, oh, love is blind. And that made me think of blind spots. And then someone else spoke of neglect. And my question was around, what if the perfect language is not spoken? And you spoke about dance, Vivek, and movement. And I was just talking to Tatiana before this call, and we're speaking about kind of dance being a minority, or like kind of a and I think on the first slide there was something around kernel being the undercurrent of Web3, and this notion of bringing kind of the fringes at the center, and hearing kind of and someone else spoke of love as, oh, meowie, it was you, that there are so many ways to love. And perhaps it's also, that's where I saw that Charles at the beginning was like, oh, there's a new channel, collage, and we've been riffing on this collage thing for the past 4 days. And there's something here around making sense of the whole by bringing all of the pieces together. And what if, like, how can we make music with all of these different ways? And how can we bring and all of it, and like collaging all the different pieces, all the different ways of understanding, and having space and kind of having all of these. Another subject that Tatiana and I were talking about is like the notion of niche, and like how Miawi and I spoke last Fireside, because we somehow have had these kind of niches, and it's like this little pockets where you protect a different way of being and nurture and love, maybe moving or playing like a kid, or just allowing for whatever wants to come up. And there's a sense in which these are places where we're growing, tending to these things that haven't been loved, that have been neglected, and that's so needed, so freaking needed right now. And I wouldn't be able to be like that, say, in a very technical conversation, so that there is value for kind of protecting these things right now, so that they can be strong and come in and play, like compose with the technologist or the engineer or the math or the different ways of being. So just appreciating that. Yeah. Oh, Tatiana, you're here. Mariana aussi. Yeah, just like the people. It's like this, it really is the margins at the center. I'm so grateful.
The gratitude is deeply, deeply mutual, Dunya. One of the interesting things about this word speculate is also like what it actually means, or just to see. And specere is the word that it comes from. And this is why it's at the heart of artistic practice, to see. But as you say, like, perhaps the perfect language is not spoken, although sometimes it is, right? Because to say it's not is to define it too much, right? Already you've put it in chains. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is. It's incarnate. Right? And what that means is as vast as the possibility of what being human means. Sometimes spoken, sometimes not, sometimes. You know, it's this quote, sometimes scholar, sometimes fool, sometimes naked, sometimes man. Thus they appear on earth, the free people. Right? It's a vast range. And when we know specere, to see what that really is, this careful observation, then we can see both its power and its shadow, right? Because that thing of sight is so interesting. We are all in a speculative dream, right? There's so many different ways of putting this in all the different traditions, but that's what it amounts to. And it's like, can you see through it by insight, right? Because like it's that, like sight itself is such a the way that it's often talked about when contrasted with sound is that, like, in order to see into a box, you have to open it and violate its interiority. There's something penetrative about sight, which is reflected in the way in which it affects observations in science, the way in which it changes how people see in social and psychological relationships. Whereas to understand what is in a box with sound, you need only knock on the outside. You never violate its interiority, and you know. and you can appreciate that, right? But similarly speaking, that most violent, penetrating, masculine aspect of sight can be bent back on itself to insight, right? And then there's the seeing through the dream, which is not spoken, but incarnate. It's not, yeah. And it brings forth the perennial artistic expression, which contains all of the languages of love. There's so many of them. There's so many roots toward the word love. Brendan gave such beautiful explanations there. And then you've got, like touch, time, words, and so many different languages of love too. But beneath it's something else too, right? Which that wholeness is not something we make sense of. It makes sense of us. Right? You don't have life. Life has you. And that simple inversion is the whole thing, right? So easy.
Thank you, Andy, for going back to my question around speculation. I did not expect that the blind spot would, the seeing would bring us back there. And I'm curious, because yesterday I was having a conversation and it was around kind of the whole idea of really the need of the arts in not just like expanding like the movement, but also like the performance art into bringing kind of the speculative down to the ground. That's how I was looking at it. But then you flipped it, like when I was like, no, but speculation is at the heart of artistic performance, and it gives it its rapture in the moment, right now, in the present. And it seems like in finance, the speculation is like out there in the future, but perhaps I'm also mistaken. So perhaps if you could speak more to speculation in the context of finance and art, and in between the two and somewhere else.
Sure. Any really like meaningful or persuasive movements, word, touch, look, whatever it is, it's always a double-edged sword. So that speculative moments in arts, you can see like when somebody is really speculating, really just taking every risk they possibly can, right? It can either lead them and the entire audience into a deep perception of the sacred. You're there completely, indescribably. Or it can be the most abject kind of voyeurism. Right? Both are possible. And simultaneous, in fact. Then, like what distinguishes them is the faith in which they're received. Only that. Right? And the same is true of finance. But we want to divorce all of that because no room for faith here. Forget what the Gospels say about the tables in the temple and all of this stuff. No, it's old books. What do they have to teach us about life? No. It's there, right? It's just that final turn, that last moment is always what moves the situation, sacred and profane together. Marlon also reflects this all the time. It's not separate. You can't only have the sacred. You can't only have the sacred speculation. Yeah, you must have the profane and the abject because they are in the balance of the whole. And like this is where I very much do agree with Tatiana, that like the words just don't quite hold that. And I love words more than Tatiana does, I think. And I love Tatiana for loving words less than I do. But it doesn't quite, because what is it really to accept that, you know, to surrender to that balance, which is unknowable, and live in it, with it, in good faith with it.
Go ahead, Victor, please.
Thanks, Vivek. So I think like when I think about like how my journey with Kernel started about September 15, I think like at the beginning, like I think like I was trying to be like showing like the best of myself to everyone at Kernel. But as I'm going through this journey, I discover myself like showing myself like my vulnerability, my self-doubt, like some parts of things that you would not imagine about myself. And I still remember like so many times when I think like I was talking with Salim, and it's kind of very funny that actually like the story that we share in the past, yet we were supposed to be, I was applying for KB5 and yeah, was not accepted. But if this would not happen, like then Salim would not be a guy to help me, like knowing that, explain me like, oh, I know what you were going through and for everything. And then I still thinking like, if I will be part of this like journey, I would not be able to be like with Meow, with Dunia, with Tatiana, and so many more. Oh yeah, and Ryan, of course, through this journey. And I think like I feel like this is the journey that I was supposed to take, even though like it was kind of unexpected, very random. And yeah, like it is safe to say that my journey was the randomness that I have when Miawi was organizing that. And I'm very happy that I could be part of this journey with all of you. And I want to thank you all for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victor. I'm considering an exploration of the gift in a bit more detail, given where we are in the conversation. The specific thing that I see on the slide that's got my attention is this idea that art, pure science, education, and healing are things that don't fit well within our current economy, within the current speculative fictions that we live within. And if we care about them, we need to develop institutions or practices which convert quote unquote real money into gift money. The tricky thing with this whole thing is that this word gift, as you can tell, has all sorts of roots that we explore. There's a whole book called The Gift by Lewis Hyde, which is, of course, right here. And that transition is like such a tricky one between real money and gift money. But the idea that we can create mutually reciprocal spaces online and in person that are customs that people can opt into in their own context, and that can have financial sovereignty. They can care for one another and care for themselves in those systems. This is something that Naran Babalola from Penvala has given me a lot of inspiration about, because he talks about how in the system of Penvala, they're building a shared community endowment. Their token system is maybe one of the examples of a conversion of real money into gift money that I can actually point to. Not too many, I think, exist in Web3 yet. But he talks a lot about this, that our political organizations and our corporate organizations have figured this out, but our community spaces have not yet found this conversion. And it's in those spaces where art and pure science and education and healing may fit. So I wonder, Andy, if it's a brief reflection that you may offer, that would be great. If others would like to add to it, this may be the time, given we have about 15 minutes left in the call.
Yeah, a few important things to say about gift economies in particular, which are often underappreciated, and which really gets brought to the surface in that conversation between Robin and Lewis in his work, and also as reflected by Robin Wall Kimmerer in some of her own writing outside of just braiding sweetgrass. Robin in particular talks about this dream that she has where she goes to a gifts-based market in South America and recognizes as she walks around, she thinks about going to get some cheese, but she's like already got like some mushrooms and some herbs and some other food from like really, really beautiful food stalls, and she's decided on what she's going to cook, and cheese is not part of the dish. And so she thinks about going to get some anyway, but actually decides not to because she doesn't need it at that point. And given the context in which this is taking place, I'll leave the cheese for another day. Somebody else can use it today. When I cook a dish with cheese, it'll be that. And the reason that this is such a powerful story is that if the market were operating according to like buying and selling with the kind of money that we have today, she would have simply bought the cheese, because like if she doesn't use it today, she can use it some other day. There's exchange involved and off you go. And what it highlights is that in gift economies, there is naturally a sense of restraint. Naturally a sense of restraint which comes out of conviviality and reciprocity. And it's not often acknowledged in discussions of gift economies, which too quickly tend in towards like abundance mindsets and other ill-defined and vague notions. This particular point is really fascinating, though, from a psychological perspective and as it applies to the protocols that we build. They inculcate a sense of reciprocity and restraint, which is truly fascinating, because it's that kind of insight that I'm looking for as I think about what it really means to convert so-called real money into gift money. Because it's not through inflated and hubristic narratives about what abundance is. Abundance is the complementary opposite of sacrifice. And if you've truly been down that path, if you know this way of self-knowledge that we've been talking about for 8 weeks, then perhaps we can begin to talk about abundance. But prior to that, this understanding of restraint, reciprocity, conviviality in the vernacular is far more fertile as a direction in which to follow. And the reason that this is the case, it helps you understand convert, right? I know I've been like a little bit like a broken record today in terms of what do these words actually mean? Well, con altogether, vert, vertere, turn, right? To turn altogether, right? And we have it, again, everywhere in our language, conversion funnels, or conversion between currencies, all of these things, right? But like what it really means, turn, right? Like make that turn within yourself. And then you make it collectively with others as you learn how to dance, as you learn how to hold his or her hips and move just the right way to the harmony that is in the environment around you already, then you can, move into environments which have more to do with art, with science, with the art of science and the science of art. And finally with healing, right? Healing it's last for a reason there, is what I would say.
Beautiful. Flavia, please. So good to see you.
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, this topic really amazes me. And yeah, really interested in your point about restraint. And I really like about gift economy, like China as a sign and the gift. And really for me was super important in my kind of territory, because I was thinking about it, like questioning monetary system and how we deal with it. And I thought about like post-monetary societies and to get to know about gift economy, and realizing later in life that it's actually rooted in indigenous tribes, and get to know like how for many of them the really kind of powerful and chief and abundance is really about making the goods and things go to those in need. So I think it completely connects to what you're saying about, yeah, I don't need that. So if I'm given something that I don't need, I would just pass it forward. We don't have like this sense of, of keeping and just really allowing things to flow and reach those that are really in need of those. So once we need something, we can also be assured that we get so the sense of meet all our needs being met, and this continuous flow of goods and services is really something that it's interesting to me. And thinking of like gift money, something that it's kind of new for me and interesting as well. Like how can we bring those things together, the energy of the gift into kind of monetary system, and something that it's kind of not really for now like tuned into this energy of gratitude, like really saying, yeah, this is a token of gratitude for the service or whatever that you given to me, and how can we pass it on forward.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you, Flavio. The notion of the gift is that which flows to the empty place, which is such a deeply indigenous notion in the true meaning of that word too. The gift always flows to the empty place, is at once a dictum of enormous like social power, right? Because as you say, it focuses collective attention on who needs what when. And that seems to be a really, really powerful and meaningful and worthwhile and pro-social way in which to encourage the flow of our attention, broadly speaking, remembering that we are each other's environments, and that like that primary inclination is an enormously powerful one in and of itself, especially in like collective or social contexts, right? That the gift goes to the empty place always. And then like it has this double directedness again, which brings us back to that conversation about love, right? Because in order to receive in good faith, you have to empty yourself, right? Otherwise, just by virtue of the structure of a gift, you cannot receive it. This is, Brennan has been talking a lot about like the influence of the Platonists, Neoplatonists, Platonists on Christianity, particularly the early Desert Fathers. This was their whole thing, right? The word was called kenosis, right? Emptying out, total humility. Right? Kenosis, properly speaking, is the humility of Christ on the cross. Remembering that Christ was not his surname, and it is a cosmic principle, something more like Buddha nature or the Tao. Right? The first thought in the mind of God is how it's often talked about, which is what got so garbled in like so much mainstream theology, that somehow if you think Christ was Jesus's last name, then you think that the Messiah is an afterthought, that we're in original sin, and as an afterthought, God's like, oops, here we go, here's like a redeemer. It's not that, right? Christ is a cosmic principle, it's the first thought in the mind of God. Grace and redemption are guaranteed before the start of time. It's only with that first thought that time itself begins. And recognizing that then is kenosis, right? Because here is a historical figure incarnate who nevertheless has the humility to live a fully human life and be persecuted to the utmost for it. And it's that humility which brings the ultimate gift. You find that kind of same archetypal pattern across all of the major stories in the world. It's not just Christianity. So I love that. I love that notion of emptiness, right? Because it does speak to the despair and the doubts and the uncertainty of being human, right? Even Jesus in the garden at Gethsemane, and as he's on the cross, he cries out, "Oh Father, why have you forsaken me?" Doubt is endless. Uncertainty is endless. Despair is always there. And at certain levels of love, and levels is even the wrong way to talk about it, in certain modes of love, in certain expressions of it, one finds naturally all of effects, whatever. But total emptiness is not lack, it's not vacuum, it's not any of those things. It's gift beyond speaking. Right? It's the redemptive grace that is prior to creation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Flavia, for the beautiful question. I feel compelled to call on Sister Tibebwa if you would like, if you have anything to share. I see a moon up there, I think.
Yes, you do. Yes, yes, you do. Greetings of love and light and peace and darkness, Colonel family. Yes, you see the moon she's just getting fat. I have just so much. It's been fire tonight, I have to say. I know it's been like there's just so many different ways of looking at things. And so I've had so many mind-opening readings in the chat and listening and loving and I would have always thought, as I say, that the opposite of love, if you want to say, is fear, because when we fear things, we come up with all kinds of other reasons why we don't have to feel that emotion. And so, you know, most things is fear of losing or fear of looking small or feeling vulnerable or opening our hearts or, you know, showing our little girl or our little boy that's inside every one of us. So most of what we do is for fear of other people seeing us as we see ourselves. And so, yes, I could go on and on so many different of these subjects. I will just say that I would be my pleasure and my honor to hold ceremony on the full moon on Tuesday night on the 8th. It is full lunar eclipse, so it is a very, if you want to say, supernatural event. I don't know how everyone's been feeling the amount of kind of chaotic energy that's been in these 2 weeks between the two eclipses. And so, yes, there's information on the convos, I think. And it's been, again, my honor and my true pleasure. And this reciprocity of love, it means that as a guide, what the energies that I've been able to put in have been amplified and sent back out to me. And so, yeah, testimony to the reciprocity of love. Give thanks and praise.
Thank you, sister. Yes, the full moon ceremony that sister refers to is on November 8th, which is also the day of celebration, which will be the last event formally of Kernel Block 7. But with the beginning of 8, or even before it, it seems like Kernel Vibe Hour, Kinder Kernel may continue. I want to leave one last link once again to that artifact. If you want to just leave it open or bookmark it, so that if you have the inspiration to share any screenshots or things that were meaningful to you, it would really help us to create this collage that we're trying to share and collectively play with during the celebration. It'll be a lot of fun and hopefully kind of a good mix between Zoom and Gather for next Tuesday. So be on the lookout for some last invites there. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. If you're with us for Expo, we'll see you tomorrow. And as always, it's just a pleasure to be with all of you during Fireside. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ooh.